Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly, and voila! You get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello, and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. Alongside of all of the really wonderful conversations we've had over the last few weeks and months, one of the things that's been very interesting that we've been talking about, at least on the periphery, is artificial intelligence. I'd like to welcome back Ian Cook from Viser and Dino Zincarini from Turetsky Consulting to talk about artificial intelligence. Welcome, Ian. Welcome, Dino.
Hey, David.
Hi, David.
Today, we're going to have a fascinating discussion. We're going to dive in and talk about artificial intelligence in people analytics. This is going to be one of those conversations that we could have for an entire day, or actually maybe even a few days. But we're going to limit it to a half hour, and we're going to start, Ian, with what is artificial intelligence in people analytics, and kind of start from the baseline of what are we talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence?
I think there's two important things. AI, as it's been presented, is it's the use of very powerful statistical techniques that have been evolved where the machine doesn't just run a regression model. It runs a regression model, it checks the regression model, it works out if the model's good or bad, it then reruns it and self-checks. So it's actually using statistics on statistics, a lot of processing power to find a better answer. So a lot of machine learning gets featured in getting deep insight out of big data sets, or learning patterns and learning predictable processes so that we can automate. Like a lot of AI has been focused on that automate. So when it comes to people analytics, there are areas like who wouldn't want to know who's at risk of exit, who wouldn't want to know, predict other things about absence rates, or all of that insight into what's going to happen in my business. AI is often about prediction or automation. So in the people analytics space, a lot of it is being used and presented as, we'll tell you what's going to happen. Sometimes it's presented as, we'll tell you what you should do. And I think that's an area that's why it's well worth exploring in this conversation.
I think one of the things that we often talk about when we talk about artificial intelligence is looking at data. And as you say, looking for patterns in the data and being able to leverage those patterns for certain things. Now, as you mentioned, the risk of exit is one of those things. What are some other things that you've seen, especially recently, the use of AI for in the world of people analytics?
There's a huge use of it in recruiting. I mean, if you think about the data scale problem of parsing a resume, you think about the time it takes for a recruiter to do that. Having been that person myself, I don't want to go through 1,000 resumes. I want to go through 5. Even going through 5, first of all, it's error prone. Like, did I just get off a really awkward conversation? Am I frustrated? Am I reading the resume the same way as I read the one where I'm sitting with a cup of coffee and I've just had a really good time? So there's a whole element there of human bias. So it's used a lot in recruiting to how do we sift that huge haystack of data about people and find those few nuggets of gold that we think are worth hiring. And whether it's worth talking to or it's worth hiring, like there's a whole spectrum there. So there's a huge use of it in there, especially also with video interviewing. It's been applied a lot in that talent acquisition space for sure.
And I think this is really interesting because, well, everything we're saying is interesting, but this is particularly interesting because when we talk about AI, it's taking a step further than just machine learning and algorithms. Machine learning and algorithms are the tools we use to develop AI very often. But when we get into AI, what we're saying is that there is an intelligence making decisions that is not a human. And of course, because HR is so much about people, right? We're making decisions about people all the time. It's people making decisions about people. AI is really a disruptive force in here, because what we're saying is we're taking people out of the decision-making process a bit and leaving it to something else. And that something else is an algorithm that has been built and then trained to do something very specific. And I think a lot of people who are embracing AI may not always be aware of what is that algorithm and how is it making the choices? Why is it making those choices? How did it learn to make those choices? And that worries me a little bit. I don't know what you all think, but that is interesting to me.
Well, it's certainly worrisome from the perspective of where it's getting its training data from and how it's being configured. And, we've all had experiences where we would hope that computers do things that we want them to do, and we get frustrated when it doesn't just read our minds. And I think that some of the problem with artificial intelligence is we believe that the algorithms that get created will just read our minds and be able to do the things we hope they'll do. And to Ian's example, a recruiter needs to be able to configure the AI in a way in which enables them to mirror the kind of decisions that they're wanting to make, not the decisions they had made in the past, but making the decisions in ways in which they would make them if they did have their coffee, if they were having a good day, and if their eyesight was good enough that day to read, the 10-point font on the resume. And so to me, it comes down to a little bit of getting in the mind of the person who's using the AI and being able to understand from the configuration as well as the data that helped train that AI.
Totally. And, and my personal standpoint, so I share your concerns, Dino, and my personal standpoint that is I'm pro the use of AI. The more we can automate, speed, support decisions, the better it is. There's so much complexity. There's so much potential for bias that anything that improves that should be used. At the same time, I think the expectations and hype around how AI will just completely remove the problem and kind of give it to us on a silver plate with an easy button is completely wrong. And that, people need to understand exactly as Dino highlights. So great cases recently around the whole use of facial recognition. Facial recognition was trained on predominantly Caucasian faces. It does a really bad job of faces who don't fit into the data it was trained on. That's a deep error. It's one that's hard to fix. It's one that didn't get found until it was actually being used, which again gives you that, oh, really? So those kinds of elements, I think, are absolutely essential to consider if you want to start using it yourself.
I agree with you completely. And I'm in the awkward position of realizing I may have painted myself as a Luddite, but in reality, I am actually in support of it. I like questioning this stuff, especially when I see a rush to everyone doing the same thing. And I'm wondering, does everybody really know what's going on? And there seems to be that rush in the HR world. And I agree with you. I think if anything, the power of a new technology, especially something like AI, is in augmenting people at the beginning. I think there's a lot that can be done. I think the challenge though, and it's what you just mentioned there, it's, we actually don't always understand how it makes decisions. And that's not necessarily our fault. I don't think, and there's quite a few articles on this if you Google it, it's impossible to actually know how a lot of AI makes its decisions because it's trained using machine learning. That is, a piece of code goes out, somebody writes it, and that code starts to evolve. It changes itself. After several iterations, and I'm not talking 2 or 3 iterations, like thousands, it's pretty much unknowable, even to the original writer of that code, what it's currently doing. And so it becomes a question of trust. How is that AI evolving? How is it learning? Well, it's learning from the data that it's being fed. It's no longer possible to decipher what the code itself is doing necessarily, but we do know what data we're feeding that algorithm to train it. To your example that you just gave, Ian, with the facial recognition, if the data set being provided is not representative or is biased in some way, well, then your AI is going to have the exact same bias that your data reflected. So knowing at least what we're feeding these or who the vendors are that are creating this can help you understand what you're ultimately going to get out of this thing.
Yeah. And you're hitting on something that I wanted to make sure we cover in this conversation, which is the need for the end user, the person who's using the AI to make the decision, to ensure that there's validation of the results. As you say, Dino, often you can't actually inspect the mechanics. You don't know how the sausage is made. but it's absolutely vital that you can inspect the sausage at the end, because there's lots of great examples where, and we get into the one that from Amazon, where people have run AI and they've done the right job of validating, like, is this giving us answers that we need? Is this giving us answers that match before they let it out in the wild? Like, of any other kind of statistical process, I think validation that AI is doing a fair and just job is kind of an absolute given.
And I think that brings up the kind of next topic, which is, what are the things that people need to be aware of, that organizations need to take into consideration when they start augmenting decisions with AI? And so while the robots aren't ready yet to take over for HR, and they're starting to be utilized, as you said, in the recruiting world especially, what are the things that we need to think about as we're starting to introduce more artificial intelligence into the HR world?
Hey, it's Bob Pulver, host to You podcast. Human-centric AI, AI-driven transformation, hiring for skills and potential, dynamic workforce ecosystems, responsible innovation. These are some of the themes my expert guests and I chat about, and we certainly geek out on the details. Nothing too technical. I hope you check it out.
Well, one of the ones for me, the big one, is how did that AI learn what it does? As I was saying before, most AI has to be trained to do what it does. And a lot of the vendors that you'll work with who offer AI have built that up over time, running on a data set. And very often that data set is provided by you, right? Your own data is what's used. So it's understanding what data you're feeding it. We alluded briefly there to an Amazon example, and lots of kudos to Amazon for being so transparent with their experience on AI that they built themselves for recruiting. You can go out and look it up and see the papers that were published. But in a nutshell, they built an AI, they trained it with their own data in order to eliminate bias in recruiting. And in the end, when they turned it on and saw what it was suggesting in terms of people to interview, they saw that it had the exact same bias as the humans who were making the decision before. And the net of it is that it's because they used their own historical data, which was in itself the product of a biased recruiting process. The AI learned the exact same biases. So even though it looked like it was legitimate because, hey, it's a computer. A computer doesn't know how to discriminate. Actually, it does. It learned it from the data that was being fed. So knowing the data that you're providing and being really honest and introspective about that data and making sure that it's as unbiased as possible will make sure that you know what the results coming back are. So know your data.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The other piece, I think, is that's kind of twofold. One is if we're looking at that data source, is just understanding the ethics behind the use of the data. We're engaged with a bunch of people who are doing skills generation. We have a partnership with MZ, various other folks like that. And it's a really good use of AI because they're cataloging something that's kind of independent of the person. They're crunching through all of this architecture around job descriptions and who's doing what and how's it being done, so that they can build this standardized view of skills. So it's this independent data set where the cataloging, the building of the library and the maintaining of the library is really, really powerful. And then, matching people against that. So it's less about the person, more about the domain. So it's a really a powerful one. The other pieces are just to think about problem solution. AI is really good where you have a known data set and a known answer. It will do better than a human in those places. It's automation, augmentation, where you have a partial, unknown, varied data set and the range of possible answers is really wide, like, who should we promote, and etc.
Right.
It's a lot less powerful.
But I think one of the things that companies definitely need to take into consideration, especially with that, which is who to promote or what to promote or when to promote, is that there's got to be some context that humans use to be able to take the recommendations and augment the recommendations that AI provides to them with real world understanding of situation, because the model can't know everything. The model only knows what we tell it, and it's only trained on the things that had built the model to begin with. So knowing other situational things you can't just go with what it says. You need to use your own common sense and the common sense of the people who are actually making that business decision to be able to actually act on that data. And then probably, if you can, would be great is feed that back into the model to be able to help train the model even further.
I like the way you're describing that, David, because a lot of the commentary is about prescription, like the technology will tell us what to do.
Right.
And I think that's actually a false target. I think the technology will narrow the decision space for us and make it better. And
sure.
We talked a little about an example, again, that Google have published where they looked at algorithmically creating a list of who should be promoted. They looked at a bunch of data around people's self-ranking. They looked at the delta between that and the manager ranking. They looked at who had been promoted in the past, and they built a factor that said, these are the population who should be promoted. Kudos to their management set. They said, we're not following this data. Sure, we'll use it as a short list, like maybe it cuts off the bottom half and it'll narrow down the decision space. But, a promotion for an individual, it's a decision that I, as a manager, am accountable for. I'm not going to divest that to a piece of technology. I also think there's legal risks to, certainly with GDPR now in, like that was pre-GDPR, but with GDPR in, there's problems and there's legal risks to an organization. It's like, well, why did this person get promoted? Oh, the computer said so. It's like, okay, like how do you defend that?
Yeah.
And that's a great point too. And it alludes to something you mentioned before, Ian, as well, as the change management side of this. Just because you've built this shiny, fancy AI, if you don't have buy-in from the people who are to use it and who are ultimately accountable for it, the managers in your example, I think that's what happened with Google. Not only is that going to fail as a deployment like most software does, but it's a key source of feedback to help improve the overall system. It's those humans that you're going to augment, not necessarily replace, who are key to helping you understand how best to roll this out and adopt it.
One of the things I think we can use as analogs to this conversation around AI and what people should be aware of is, let's look at the use of the artificial intelligence that we can use every day, but we don't necessarily use every day in our personal lives. And the artificial intelligence I'm talking about is Siri, Alexa, and Hey Google. And for those of us who have struggled with Siri, Alexa, and Hey Google, especially last night when I was helping my son get to bed, and I asked, Hey Google, can you put on a lullaby for an 8-year-old? It had no idea how to parse that. And so while it may have thousands of requests for playing songs or playing genres or whatever, it couldn't wrap its head around the 8-year-old part of this. And so it played baby lullabies for my son, which started to make him cry because it made him feel nostalgic for his youth. but I think that, but this is the commercial implementation of artificial intelligence that all of us have access to today, and could have millions of training sets of data and millions of bats, as it were, with being able to utilize data to be able to come back with a representative idea of what I'm asking for.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
And I think it's a great example of the current state of the field reality. As somebody with an accent, I only use voice activation for really simple tasks. And I speak quietly and directly as though I was talking to somebody who's not, English is not a first language. So I alter my language style to deal with this stuff. So, and yeah, the promise versus the reality is it's huge leaps forward.
Sure.
But it's still evolving, which is an important piece, I think, in terms of setting realistic expectations. I do want to feature one piece of AI that is similar to Siri, and it's used by some colleagues of mine, and it's a robot organizer. So it basically does scheduling and emailing for this group of folk we work with. They've named it Evie, and it is actually bomb-proof. I'm really impressed by the use, but and that's one of those simple things that what can you automate? It's like, well, who loves scheduling? Nobody. So
nobody.
You write to them, you copy Evie, you say, hey, looking for a meet time. This is what it's about. Here's some options. Evie checks their calendar, comes back, gives you the options, drops it in, sends reminders, like automates that whole engagement of when are we meeting. It does it very personally. Like that language generation is really good. So, but this is the first, and I've messed with it. I've tried to put her off, but Like, it's good AI. So,
but it's not a chat bot. It's actually an email box that you're sending this to.
yeah, it's an intelligent organizer is how I would describe it. Artificially intelligent organizer, but it's a known problem with a known solution. Like, I need a time, I need a window, I need a person. Like, the permutations of the language are quite clear. Does this work? No, but this does. So it's done a good job. And it's like, again, it's an example of how this is evolving, because they love the fact they don't have to employ somebody simply to manage time.
So I think Turetsky Consulting will have Evie in its next set of resources to hire.
Yes.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by Turetsky Consulting and listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
And so, Ian, I think that brings up the next conversation, which is what is possible in the world of HR with artificial intelligence? Because while we've talked about some of the challenges and we've talked about some of the understandings of artificial intelligence, where can this go and what can it do? Can it actually replace people?
So I think it replaces people in kind of clear informational cases. Like, chatbots is one of the, we know that chatbots is just kind of kicked off, and that chatbot of, hey, I have a question about my benefits. Hey, I have a question about this, that, and the other. Known questions, known answers, all kind of categorical data. Like, that to me is
very straightforward.
It's really straightforward. It's a controllable problem. Where I think it can go is augmentation. Dino used the word, and I think he's like spot on. The first way to think about AI is not replacement through automation, but it is about augmentation. We've got some great examples from customers using the AI that's in Viser to do risk of exit, but the computer's not making the decision. The managers are making the decision, and they're given a frame of, like, here's the 5 people who are your top risk of exit. Let's talk with our business partner about what are we going to say? What are we going to do? What actions are going to work best? You know, the notion is that the technology should prescribe an action. It's like, well, they're going to leave, so why they would stay. And that's not true. Like, we know they're going to leave because of leaving patterns. Why people stay, we have no data on why people stay. So we don't have the other half of the problem. Like, as you highlighted, you're limited by the data set. So I think that is, again, a really clear place. Shortlisting, I hope if we get into skills as part of a resume parsing world, shortlisting will get better. There's still a long way to go and I think there's a lot of opportunity in talent acquisition. There's still a long way to go in terms of realizing that through the technology.
My hope is that HR starts using it for things as well, again, from the augmentation side, but to show opportunities, like, for example, on equity, and whether we're talking about all of diversity and equity and inclusion, or we're talking about compensation management and showing where there are opportunities for paying more fairly. There are so many number crunching activities that a computer can do better about, let's say, for example, being able to get to an equitable distribution of pay and being able to crunch the numbers to say, here's how much your spend is now, here's how much you need to be more equitable across your entire population, here are the areas of concern, and here's how you can plan to get there. A computer can take permutations in no time and be able to get those kinds of answers. And that has a lot of good that it can do that compensation people, who I love, they're my people, we don't want to go there. It's the diversity and inclusion people who aren't as much comp people, but much more focused on getting to the right answers. It would be my hope that we were able to kind of generate those kind of models to help compensation and the DE&I folks to get there. That's what I hope, because computers do a much better job of being able to not only generate those models, but also to use AI to parse who are the right cohorts to actually examine.
Yeah.
And to do those 3-dimensional models to say, if I'm going to pay this group more, does that necessarily disadvantage the other group? Exactly. And do those permutations to get there.
I think that's a great example of a place to apply it. Yeah, I love it.
And for me, being in the analytics space, where I'd love to see is where AI can really help cut down the noise or find the gems hidden out there. I mean, there's almost a limitless number of metrics you can create for every data field that you have in your database. You can create a metric around it. And so it becomes a game of whack-a-mole if you're trying to figure out which metric to pay attention to. It's important now, but then some other number might be fluctuating that you don't even know because you're not measuring it. Wouldn't it be great if you had an AI out there that could simultaneously look at, hundreds, if not more, different indicators of what's going on based on specific problems you're looking to solve for, and have it suggest to you, here's where you should pay attention. Here's where everything's good, but over here is where there's anomalies. I'm not going to go out and solve it for you because I'm not some crazy Terminator type robot. I'm going to just let you know that there's some stuff here because this is where your human brain is better than my AI brain to conceptualize the problem and brainstorm a solution.
Yeah, you're kind of triggering a whole bunch of conversations we've had internally around absence and absence detection. And we looked at, do you give an individual a risk of absence? And we said, absolutely not. That's not okay. That oversteps the bounds of ethics. At the same time, can we look at population behavior around absence and say, these populations, these pockets, these shift areas. So we're not making it about the specific individual, but we can make it about certain populations. And that seems, again, that kind of that anomaly of, the absence rates in this specific population are standout. You might want to go and inspect this. It's augmenting. It's finding the need. It's not finding the specific needle, but it's finding the cluster of needles where further human intervention, human thought is necessary.
So I wanted to ask you something about that, Ian, because to Dino's point, one of the things that I've been wondering about is we've talked in the past about bringing in other data sets that other companies like Qualtrics, I think it was, where you're looking at network analysis and you're looking at emails or you're looking at conversations and who you're having those conversations with. And you're diving in to say, what's your frequency with having conversations at other levels, trying to understand where you fit. If we can bring O&A into these kinds of conversations, take the absence, take other things, and be able to build bigger models to say, what's the contribution of people who may be taking more absence? Does that show a pattern that then can inform things like the turnover prediction and be able to then coach better to say, hey, Dino is really important to me. He's my top person earner in this type of field. I need to make sure that we're taking care of him. There are some indications that I've gotten from my model that say Dino's taken some sick days recently. He's taken some vacation days. He might be interviewing. I want to try and stay on top of this. I love him. I want him to stick around. How do I prevent that from happening? Or how do I coach the manager to be able to make sure that that's not going to happen?
Yeah, and I think there's a great use case there. And at the same time, I'm kind of aware of the number of false positives. Like AI suffers from the when it starts to impact into a human's sphere of work, it really suffers from being put aside because like one or two false positives. You might get 10 true positives, but you start to get one or two false positives. Like, why did you tell me to have a conversation with them? You were wrong. Like the software was wrong. And so when you get down to that individual level, you need to be aware of how do we present the data to the person using it so that it's right. Like, here is guidance, here is a frame, here is a information to point you in the right direction, as opposed to, do X. As you guys were talking, it triggered something else around like use in HR skills we've kind of mentioned before. And skills extends into that career path. I'm definitely seeing a lot of use in helping the process that used to be done by people for the senior group. It's like, what are you doing now? Where do you want to get to? What's the 3-4 stage job in future? Like, how are you going to get there? Like that handcrafted career pathing. A lot of that is now more able to be built into technology so that people can self-serve. And again, the smart ones are doing it in, here's a window, here's a series of paths. It's not, you should do A next. There is choice 1, choice 2, choice 3. Depending on which one you choose, here's the options list that presents itself to you. And again, I think that's a smart use. It narrows the decision space. It presents options for people to opt into, as opposed to telling them like, do X, like not prescription, but a kind of framing of decision, I think is much more powerful.
There have been HCMs that have done that. They've provided employee self-service around that. I just wonder what the adoption rate of those types of technologies are. And if there's anybody listening who actually has that kind of model built into their HCM, I'd love it if you could let us know what your experiences have been in being able to utilize that. Because what I've heard is that those are extremely difficult to implement because of the conversation we had before about the false positives as well as the usefulness of the recommendation. Ian, I know we're talking about what's possible.
Yeah.
But the things that I've heard about those types of models are that people know kind of where they want to go. They may not be aware of the possibilities that exist, but they kind of are reticent to take the advice of an algorithm that kind of doesn't know everything about them and can't be able to kind of get in their mind about this stuff.
Oh, exactly.
And that's why I'd love to know what the adoption rate of those types of algorithms are.
No, I completely agree. It is that there is a natural human pushback on having a computer tell you what to do. It's like,
right. But then again, I mean, that's part of everything about AI is that the robots are only, to Dino's point before, they're only good as the data you feed them and the adoption of them so they can learn from the problems that we've had with utilizing their adoption. And if you don't give that round trip and get the how successful was this, they're never going to get better.
I'm chuckling to myself here because what we're saying is the AI has to be trained. It has to make mistakes and we have to understand that calibration. It has to fit in with our teams. In other words, is it any different from hiring a person? I mean, we're going through the exact same steps here.
Well,
funny. Yeah,
but that's got to be a really smart person, right? And that person's got to parse a lot of data. And that person's got to be really good. And at the end of the day, you're right. Is it going to cost us a lot to build that model and to keep and feed them and care for them?
Yeah, I'm being a bit facetious, but I think this is the point, is that maybe we do have to think about adopting this new type of technology a little bit like we think about hiring a person, right? Like, think about the training period. Think about that period of making some errors, like Amazon did, right? They didn't just throw the thing out there. They watched it. They saw that it wasn't doing what they wanted and they took it back and tried to fix it. That idea of change management and how does this fit in with the people? How does this fit into a workflow? Don't just turn it on and expect it to work like any other software. I think there's something there.
There's definitely something there. Do you know, like I watched the space closely, and I actually saw a post that Walmart had replaced its robots with people. They'd actually reversed out on the decision on shelf stacking through automation and gone back to human stacking. So I think you're right. Like, it's experimentation. Treat it in the same way as like. Is it here to augment a person? Is it here to replace a person? Right. All of those same questions. And again, like, I think that's something that's also not always understood is just how much horsepower it takes to run an AI model. We run an AI model for our customers on a sort of regular basis for load. It uses massive amounts of our server capacity. We're a big business. That's fine for us, but it's not the sort of thing I can stick on my laptop and just have it run.
Right.
You need like that kind of server, just lots and lots of computing capacity to run it. And we're running relatively small models compared to, some of the stuff that's going on.
So Ian and Dino, I want to thank you very much. We've talked a lot about really cool things about AI. I've learned a lot from this conversation. We've talked about what it is in the context of HR and people analytics. We've talked about some of the things that we need to be aware of when we're implementing artificial intelligence in the HR world. And we've also kind of put on our crystal balls and maybe looked at some AI and said, what's possible? What is there? And what should we be thinking about? And we brought up some really interesting things, especially like AI might be like a baby that you're hiring, or a person that you're hiring. May not be a baby, maybe a person that you're hiring, because there still might be wage and hour laws about that. But it's like a person you're hiring, and you need to give it some space, and it needs to be able to learn and grow from its mistakes and be able to onboard appropriately. Any last final thoughts about AI in the world of people and analytics before we close?
I love the summary, David. I think there's just one last thing that I would repeat just for emphasis, is that you always have to consider the ethics of the data you are feeding it.
Absolutely.
You cannot go into an AI project without establishing an ethical standard prior to doing anything. It is absolutely essential. It's the right thing to do. It's also, going to stop you getting in trouble later on. So, don't forget the ethics is just something I would also add in.
Dino?
Just to know that even if you don't understand the code, you understand the data. And if you don't understand the data that was used to train the AI, I wouldn't turn it on. It's your obligation to know how it was trained and to be able to trust that source. So working with vendors you trust and data that you at least know where it came from, and then give it that chance to experiment.
Outstanding. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Ian, thank you.
Pleasure.
Dino, thank you.
Always fun.
It sure is. And thank you very much for listening. And we really do want your feedback on this one because artificial intelligence is definitely a polarizing topic in the world of HR. So please leave your comments. And if you like us, please subscribe. If you like the podcast, please subscribe. And also, if you know somebody that might be interested, please send it on their way. But thank you very much. And we appreciate you listening to this podcast, the HR Data Labs podcast. And thank you very much and stay safe.
That was HR Data Labs. Please visit turetskyconsulting.com/podcast to review the show, add comments about this episode, or add new ideas about upcoming shows you'd like to hear. Feel free to be creative, but please be nice. Thank you for joining us this week on the HR Data Labs podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.